Chapter 9. A New Game. The small room felt even smaller that evening. The yellowish light from the ceiling lamp cast long shadows across the floor, where dolls and old drawings lay scattered among each other. The witch child sat on her knees beside her bed with a doll in each hand, slowly moving them across the floor like tiny people in a world only she understood. Her dark hair fell down in front of her face, and every now and then she pushed it away with the back of her hand without really thinking about it. The TV was on in the background with no sound, flickering faintly with black and white images that made the walls blink like an old nightmare. She suddenly stopped moving the dolls. Someone was outside the door. Not because she had heard footsteps. She felt it in another way. The trembling nervousness in the air, the heart beating faster on the other side of the metal. Fear. A small smile slid across her lips. The door opened carefully, almost as if the person behind it hoped she would not notice. A man in a foundation uniform stepped inside with tense shoulders and a strained smile. He tried to seem calm, but his hands betrayed him. His fingers kept moving toward the edge of the folders under his arm, as if he constantly needed to make sure they were still there. The witch child lifted her head and watched him silently for a moment. She could feel his gaze quickly move around the room, toward the cameras, the door behind him, and then back to her again. "I won't do anything," she said quietly. Her voice was calm, almost kind, and it made the man blink in surprise before he quickly nodded. "That's good," he replied, stepping farther inside. "That's very good." She remained completely still with the dolls in her hands. "What's your name?" "Mike," he said after a short hesitation. "My name is Mike." She nodded slowly, as if storing the name somewhere inside her head. "My name is the Witch Child." "I know," he said with a careful smile. For a moment, she almost seemed pleased that he said it that way. Not like a code, not like a number, just her name. Mike crouched down a few meters away from her. He was clearly trying to seem less threatening, but she could still feel the tension in him. Even now, he sat ready to jump up again if something went wrong. "I'm not here to play today," he said carefully. "I just need to run a few small tests." The words changed her face at once. The smile did not disappear completely, but it slowly sank away like light drowning beneath water. She looked down at the dolls again and let her fingers glide over one of their small cloth arms. "I don't want any more tests," she muttered. "They're boring." Mike swallowed. "I know," he said quietly, "but I'm not the one who decides." She lifted her eyes toward him again. "Can't we just play a little instead?" There was something almost hopeful in the way she asked. Not manipulative, not threatening, just lonely. Like a child who had asked the same question far too many times and already knew the answer before it was spoken. Mike smiled sadly. "If I don't do it, they'll get angry with me." She said nothing. The room became quiet again, except for the faint hum of the ventilation above them. Slowly, her gaze drifted away from Mike and up toward the camera in the corner of the wall. The little red light blinked calmly back at her. She stared at it for a long time. Mike felt the temperature in the room change almost imperceptibly. Not physical warmth, but something heavier, like electricity before a thunderstorm. The witch child slowly rose from the floor. The dolls slipped from her hands and landed soundlessly on the carpet behind her. She walked toward the glass in the wall with bare feet, while her fingers brushed along the cold surface. On the other side, the researchers were probably already watching her, writing things down, analyzing her face, measuring her reactions. She could almost imagine them. "They don't see me as a real person," she said quietly without turning around. Mike did not answer. He could not find the words quickly enough. She rested her forehead against the glass for a moment. Then the small smile returned. But this time it was different. Not warm, not childlike. Something had changed behind her eyes. "If they want tests," she whispered almost to herself, "then we can make a more fun test next time." Mike felt a chill run through his body. Behind the glass, the monitor suddenly began to flicker faintly. The ceiling light blinked once, then again, and over on the floor, one of the dolls slowly began to move on its own. Chapter 10. Little Friends. The faint hum from the lights began to change. At first, it was almost impossible to notice, like electricity moving wrong through the walls. But slowly the sound grew into a deep vibration that could be felt inside the body itself. Mike breathed heavier and straightened slightly from the floor while his eyes darted around the room. Something felt wrong. Warm. It started in his hands. A strange tingling heat beneath the skin, as if his blood had suddenly begun rushing far too fast through his veins. He opened his mouth to say something, but stopped when he heard voices behind the glass on the other side of the observation room. The researchers' calm conversations had turned into confused questions. "Can you feel that? Wait, what's happening to my chair? No, no, why does everything look bigger?" The panic spread quickly. The witch child still stood in front of the glass with her head tilted slightly, her blue eyes glimmering in the flickering light. She almost looked fascinated, like a child watching snowfall for the first time. Mike suddenly felt the floor change beneath him. The folders beside him seemed larger. Not just a little larger, much larger. His pulse shot upward, and he looked down at his own hands. His fingers trembled. "What?" he whispered hoarsely. He quickly stood up, but nearly lost his balance as the world around him expanded at terrifying speed. Or rather, he was getting smaller. His eyes snapped toward the witch child. "What are you doing?" he shouted. She slowly turned toward him with a small smile that gently lifted her cheeks. "I just want to play," she said quietly. Her voice sounded different now, bigger, deeper. The room around Mike began to feel enormous. The cracks in the floor looked like long trenches, and the fibers in the carpet rose around his feet like thick ropes. He stumbled backward and stared upward in shock as the witch child towered over him more and more every second. No, not growing. He was shrinking. His stomach twisted with pure panic as her bare feet now looked like gigantic pillars against the floor. The fabric of her dress moved heavily like enormous curtains high above him, and her face seemed impossibly far away now. Mike gasped. He was no bigger than a tiny toy figure. No bigger than Lego. The witch child slowly lowered herself onto her knees in front of him, and the movement alone sent a deep tremor through the floor. Her gigantic hand landed in front of him with a soft thud, her fingers curling slightly around him without touching him. "See?" she said, sounding happier now. "Now you can play with me." Mike could barely breathe. He stared up at the enormous face above him, the blue eyes that filled his entire world, and the faint warmth of her breath washing over him like wind. Behind her, screams suddenly erupted. A blue flash burst through the room, and several people appeared on the floor in short flickers of light. 7 researchers and staff members collapsed in confusion onto their knees and hands. Some screamed, while others simply stared around in shock. One woman desperately grabbed for her glasses as they slid from her face and smashed against the floor with a heavy crash at their new size. "What is happening? Where are we? Oh, God!" Their voices sounded tiny now. The witch child looked down at all of them with a wide smile. She sat completely down on the floor and folded her legs beneath herself while her enormous shadow spread across the tiny people in front of her. To the researchers, it felt like sitting before a living mountain. Her hair hung around her shoulders like dark curtains, and every small movement she made pushed the air around them. Even her hands were large enough to wrap around several of them at once. Mike slowly turned toward the others. They were standing tightly together now, frightened and confused, staring up at the child before them. The witch child leaned closer with a curious expression. "Now you can understand it," she said quietly. "Now you're the small ones." Chapter 11. Hide and Seek. The panic spread almost immediately. The tiny researchers stood tightly together in front of the witch child while their eyes darted between the enormous walls, her gigantic body, and the floor beneath them, which now felt larger than a parking lot. Several of them instinctively began backing away from her, like small animals realizing the predator before them could crush them without effort. The witch child noticed it immediately, and she smiled. "Oh," she said softly, gently clapping her hands together. "You want to play hide and seek?" "No," one of the men shouted desperately. "Turn us back, please." She looked confused for a moment, as if she did not fully understand why he sounded so afraid. To her, it seemed obvious. Tiny people ran away. She caught them. That was how the game worked. A blue glow began shining in her hands again. In the middle of the floor behind her, a massive transparent box slowly formed from light and magic. The edges flickered faintly like glass made from electricity, and inside were pillows, blankets, and small glowing spheres, as if she had unconsciously tried to make it cozy. "That's where you stay when I find you," she said happily. That was enough to completely break them. The researchers scattered in every direction with tiny, panicked screams. Some ran toward the bed, others toward the desk or beneath the chair by the wall. Mike stood frozen for a brief moment before he also started running, his breathing fast and uneven. At their size, the room had become gigantic. The carpet fibers rose like thick plants, dust clumps looked like piles of garbage, and even tiny scratches in the floor became long trenches they had to jump across. The witch child watched them run with wide eyes full of fascination. "Wow," she whispered to herself. "You're really fast now." She leaned over the floor, and the entire world darkened beneath her shadow. Her enormous face slowly moved above them, while her hair hung around her shoulders like black curtains. Every time she moved, they felt vibrations through the ground. A woman screamed as a gigantic finger suddenly landed in front of her with a heavy thud. "Found you," the witch child said proudly. The woman turned and tried running the other way, but the fingers gently closed around her. To the woman, it felt like being grabbed by a living crane. Warm skin pressed against her body, lifting her into the air while she kicked and screamed in panic. "Please, please don't!" A blue flash surrounded her. Then she was gone. A second later, she appeared inside the transparent box from the witch child and fell onto the pillows with a terrified scream. She stared around in shock. She was still alive. The witch child clapped her hands excitedly. "One found?" Mike ran as fast as he could between the enormous legs of the chair near the wall. He could hear her voice everywhere around him, deep and rumbling like thunder through the room. "I can still see you." Another researcher desperately tried hiding behind a fallen cup on the floor. He held his hands over his mouth to avoid breathing too loudly, while the giant girl's enormous face slowly moved over the area above him. Then she stopped. Her blue eyes stared directly down at him. His heart froze. "There you are," she said gently. The man screamed and ran forward in panic, but her hand quickly dropped in front of him. The pressure from the air alone knocked him onto the floor, and before he could stand again, her fingers curled around him. Teleport. Another one inside the box. Some of them had started crying in there now. Others slammed their fists against the transparent walls, but they would not budge. The witch child crawled around the floor between them with growing excitement. She lifted pillows, looked under the bed, and curiously reached her hand behind furniture to find them. Every time she caught someone, she smiled widely, as if she truly believed they were having fun together. One man almost reached the door. He saw freedom right in front of him. Then, her bare foot came down in front of him. Bump. The floor shook so violently that he fell forward. He stared upward in pure terror as her toes moved above him like enormous pillars of flesh. "Oops," she said. Her foot slid forward. He had time to scream before the weight came down over him. But the instant his body was pressed against the floor, blue light flared around him. He vanished immediately and instead appeared inside the box with the others. Shocked, but unharmed. He gasped violently and desperately checked his own body. "No blood. She didn't kill me." The witch child looked relieved. "I didn't want to really squish you," she said quietly. "That would ruin the game." Mike was hiding behind one of her dolls near the wall now. He pressed himself against the fabric and tried to keep his breathing steady, but his hands trembled uncontrollably. He could hear the others inside the box shouting to him. "Mike! She's coming!" The shadow fell over him. Slowly, he tilted his head upward. The witch child was lying on her stomach now with her face lowered all the way to the floor. One enormous eye almost filled his entire vision while her lips slowly curled into a happy smile. "Found you." Chapter 12, Not a Monster. Mike stood completely still between her enormous fingers. The warm skin around him shifted slightly with every breath she took, and even though her grip did not hurt, it felt impossible to escape. He had been so focused on the fear, the size, the panic around them, that only now did he truly look at her. Not as an SCP, not as a monster. Just a girl, a child. Her large blue eyes stared down at him with almost childlike satisfaction at having found him, and her dark hair fell around her face in soft waves. She did not look angry, not evil, just happy that the game was not over yet. Mike felt something tighten in his chest. She really did not understand. The room swayed slightly around him as she rose from the floor and began walking toward the large transparent box. Every movement she made sent deep vibrations through her hand and into his body. Inside the box, the other researchers stood tightly together, tiny and helpless, staring up at her with frightened faces. "Please," Mike said quietly. She slowed slightly. He saw her blink down at him. "You have to understand," he continued carefully, trying to keep his voice calm despite the fear. "We're not toys. We just want to be normal again." The words hit her immediately. The small smile on her lips disappeared so quickly it almost hurt to watch. Her gaze drifted away from him for a moment, and she continued more slowly toward the box, while the silence between them grew heavier and heavier. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter, more fragile. "I know you're not toys," she said softly. Mike felt her fingers tighten slightly around him. "But you don't think I'm a real person either." She stopped completely in front of the box now. The blue light from its magic cast faint reflections across her face, and Mike could see her eyes beginning to shine with tears. "You only see me as a thing," she continued. "Something you can test, something you have to keep trapped." Her voice started trembling. "And you're always scared of me." A small tear slowly slid down her cheek. To Mike, it felt enormous, a clear drop catching the light before falling toward the floor far below with a heavy splash. He did not know what to say. For the first time since all of this had started, her sighs almost felt meaningless. She no longer sounded like some powerful being, just a lonely child who had heard fear in other people's voices for so long that she no longer expected anything else. Her hand trembled faintly around him. "I was only trying to play with you," she whispered. Inside the box, the researchers stood completely still now. No one shouted anymore. Even the panic seemed suffocated by the way she sounded. The witch child slowly lifted her hand over the box and opened her fingers. Mike fell only a few centimeters before blue light caught him and gently lowered him among the others. At the same moment, the transparent wall closed behind him again. He quickly turned around. She was already sitting down in front of them with her arms wrapped around her knees. Her enormous face rested against the fabric of her dress while she stared down at them through the faint blue glow of the box. She did not look happy anymore, just broken. And when Mike looked around at the other researchers, he could see the same question in everyone's eyes. What were you supposed to do when the most dangerous being in the Foundation did not want revenge, but simply did not want to be alone anymore? Chapter 13. A Part of Me. The transparent box hummed faintly around them, while the tiny researchers stood close together beneath the blue light. No one really knew what to do anymore. The panic was still there, but something else had crept in between the fear now. Confusion. Uncertainty. The witch child still sat outside the box with her arms wrapped around her legs, and her enormous face filled almost their entire view. Mike stood completely still, staring up at her when someone suddenly grabbed his arm. "Mike?" He quickly turned around. Anna. She came running across the pillows inside the box, clearly out of breath, before stopping in front of him with wide eyes. "Are you okay?" Mike slowly nodded and took a deep breath. "Yeah, Anna, I'm okay." Several of the other researchers slowly began gathering around them. Some cast nervous glances up at the witch child, while others desperately tried to understand the situation. One man still sat near the wall, staring blankly into space, as if his brain still refused to accept that he was only a few centimeters tall. But then the voice came, harsh, angry. "Now you listen here." Everyone flinched. An older man with gray hair had stepped forward toward the edge of the box and pointed directly up at the witch child. His face was red with anger, and even at his tiny size, he still tried to sound like a man in control. "I order you to turn us back to normal," he shouted. "When the Foundation finds out what you've done, you're going to regret this, young lady." The silence afterward felt heavy. All eyes slowly drifted upward toward her. The witch child looked down at the man without moving. Her blue eyes blinked lazily a few times while she listened. Then she wrinkled her nose slightly, almost like a child hearing something stupid. She slowly raised her hand and pointed directly at him. "They won't find out anything," she said quietly. The man narrowed his eyes. "What are you talking about?" A small smile slid onto her lips. Because you're just candy now. He looked confused for a brief second. Candy? The blue light hit him instantly. Before anyone could react, his body began changing. His arms turned soft and transparent, his skin lost its color, and his entire figure shrank inward in small jerking motions. His screams became higher and stranger as his legs melted together beneath him. Anna gasped loudly, "Oh, God!" A second later, there was no longer a human standing before them, only a tiny gummy bear. It was red and transparent, but beneath the soft surface they could still faintly see his face moving. Tiny sounds came from inside it, muffled and distorted. The witch child leaned closer curiously. "Hey, it turned out cute." She carefully picked the gummy bear up between two fingers and held it in front of her face. From the researcher's perspective, she now looked like a gigantic child holding a living piece of candy between her fingers. The little gummy bear twisted desperately. "Put me down," they could faintly hear. The witch child only smiled. "No one would miss you," she said softly. "Not if you become part of me." She slowly opened her mouth. A collective gasp erupted inside the box. Mike felt coldness spread through his body as her enormous white teeth became visible behind her soft lips. Her tongue moved slowly beneath the gummy bear, warm and glistening in the bluish light of the room. "Stop!" Anna shouted desperately. "Please stop!" Others began screaming now too, pounding against the walls of the box and shouting her name, but the witch child no longer listened. She only looked at the tiny gummy bear between her fingers with childlike fascination. Then she let it go. It fell directly onto her tongue. The man screamed. The sound stopped abruptly as her mouth closed. A heavy pull of air filled the room, followed by slow chewing motions. Her jaws worked calmly, almost enjoyably, while small, satisfied noises escaped between her lips. Mmm. She placed a hand against her stomach and slowly rubbed it through her dress with a small smile. The researcher stared up at her in pure horror. She had just eaten a human being. No one said anything. No one could. Then a blue light suddenly flashed inside the box. Everyone flinched. A moment later, the man reappeared on the floor in front of them, soaked in saliva and trembling violently. He coughed hard and crawled away on his hands and knees while his hands frantically checked his body. I was in her stomach," he stammered hoarsely. "And then I was just here." Anna quickly pulled him close while the rest of the researchers stared up at the witch child with pale faces. She simply sat there smiling back at them. Not evil, not angry, just satisfied. And in that moment, they all realized how terrifying her powers truly were. Chapter 14, A New Game. The atmosphere inside the transparent box had changed completely. No one stood shouting or pounding against the walls anymore. After what they had just seen, even the angriest researchers seemed broken. The older man still sat trembling on the floor with soaked clothes and a pale face, staring blankly ahead. Just the thought of having been inside her stomach had drained all fight out of him. Outside, the witch child still sat in front of them with a small smile while her enormous hands rested folded before the box. She almost looked satisfied now, as if she finally felt she had control over the game again. Mike stood still for a moment, thinking quickly. If they pushed her any harder now, it would only make everything worse. She did not think like they did. She reacted like a child desperately trying to hold on to something before it disappeared again. He took a slow breath and stepped toward the edge of the box. "Hey," he said, lifting his gaze toward her. The large blue eyes immediately focused on him. "We want to play with you." The words made several of the researchers turn toward him in shock. Anna stared at him in surprise too, but Mike quickly continued before anyone could interrupt. "But maybe you could make some of us big again as part of the game?" he suggested calmly. "Then it can be a competition. Whoever gets the most points gets to leave." The witch child blinked slowly. Mike could almost see her thoughts moving behind her eyes. "And," he continued carefully, "you can just make them forget afterward. Then they can't tell anyone." The silence afterward felt enormous. Everyone inside the box now stared at Mike as if he had completely lost his mind. Anna quickly glanced up at the witch child again before slowly standing beside him. "That actually sounds like a good idea," she said carefully, trying to sound calmer than she felt. "What do you think?" The witch child did not answer immediately. She leaned a little closer to the box so her face filled almost their entire view. Her eyes moved from Mike to Anna and back again. She did not look happy now. She was thinking. Really thinking. Mike felt sweat running down his back. He knew she was trying to see through him. She was not stupid. She could feel fear, feel lies, feel when people tried to manipulate her. Her gaze lingered on him a little longer. "You're not trying to trick me?" she asked quietly. Mike forced himself not to hesitate. "No," he said calmly. "The game is just more fun this way." She narrowed her eyes slightly, as if still examining him from the inside. Then, slowly, the smile returned. This time, wider, more genuine. "Okay," she finally said. Several of the researchers let out relieved breaths, but the feeling lasted only a second. "Because the loser has to be my friend forever." The smiles vanished immediately again. The witch child excitedly clapped her hands together, and the vibrations from the impact sent small shocks through the floor beneath them. "Then we can have little challenges," she said happily, "and points, and rules." She sounded genuinely excited now, like a child who had just been given a brand new favorite game. Anna quickly leaned closer to Mike while the other researchers began nervously whispering among themselves. "What exactly are you doing?" she whispered quietly. Mike kept his eyes on the witch child, who had already begun creating small glowing objects in the air around herself with her powers. "Relax," he muttered back without looking away. "I'll get you out of here." Anna looked at him for another moment. She had no idea whether he actually had a plan, but right now, he was the only person in the room who seemed to understand how to talk to her without making the situation worse. Above them, the witch child began giggling to herself while small magical platforms, dice, and strange glowing shapes floated around between her hands. "Okay," she said excitedly, looking down at them like a giant girl about to open a brand new board game. "Then we start over." Chapter 15. The Climbing Game. The witch child sat in the middle of the floor with her legs stretched out in front of her while her large blue eyes glowed with excitement. Small magical lights floated around her like fireflies in the dark, and every time she moved her hands, her fingers left short trails of glittering energy in the air. She looked completely absorbed in her own idea. "Okay," she said excitedly. "Now comes the first real game." The researchers stood gathered inside the transparent box, nervously staring up at her. Just her voice made the walls around them vibrate faintly. She leaned closer and pointed down at one of her bare legs. "You have to climb all the way up," she explained. "From my foot to my head. Whoever reaches the top gets the most points." Several of the researchers stared in disbelief up along her leg. At their size, her body looked like a mountain of warm skin and dark fabric. Her knees rose like enormous hills, and her shoulders almost disappeared into the shadows above them. Anna felt nausea twist in her stomach. "That's impossible," one of the researchers whispered. The witch child heard it immediately and quickly shook her head. No, I can't help too much," she said happily. "That's cheating." She clapped her hands once. The box vanished. The blue light around the researchers blinked away, and a second later they all stood on the floor in front of her enormous bare foot. The warmth from her skin could be felt even down here, and Mike could see tiny natural lines in her soul that now looked like deep valleys and hills. The witch child bent lower with a curious smile. "Ready?" Her gigantic face filled the sky above them. "Start!" The panic exploded almost instantly. The researchers began running toward her foot, some shoving each other aside in desperation, while others tried finding places to grab onto. Several already slipped near her ankle, where the skin was too smooth for their tiny hands. Mike ran together with Anna toward her heel. Every movement from the witch child made the ground beneath them tremble faintly. "Come on," Anna shouted. She grabbed onto a fold in her skin and started climbing upward. Mike followed behind while his fingers sank slightly against the warm skin beneath him. It felt surreal, like climbing a living wall. Above them came her giggling. "That tickles!" Her foot suddenly shifted slightly. The whole world tilted. 3 researchers immediately lost their grip and screamed as they slid down her ankle. One of them hit the floor hard, but was instantly surrounded by blue light and teleported safely to the side of the room. "Minus points," she said happily. Mike quickly looked upward. Anna was already several meters ahead of him now, moving fast toward her knee together with a younger man from the laboratory. He could easily follow them, but instead he deliberately loosened one of his grips. "Mike?" Anna shouted in alarm. He pretended to struggle for balance before sliding farther down. On the way, he grabbed hold of a woman who was about to fall completely off her leg. "Grab on!" he shouted. She desperately grabbed his arm, and Mike used all his strength to swing her toward a deeper fold in the skin where she could hold herself in place. He himself nearly lost all his momentum. The witch child's enormous eye suddenly appeared close beside them. She looked at Mike with fascination. "You're helping the others," she said quietly. Mike forced a smile. "That gives more points, right?" She thought about it for a moment. Then she smiled broadly. "Yeah!" She leaned back again, clearly pleased with the answer. The climbing continued. Some reached her thighs, where the fabric of her dress made climbing easier. Others were shaken loose when she moved her leg too much or giggled hard enough that the vibrations made them lose their grip. One man nearly reached her shoulder before she suddenly leaned slightly onto her side to watch them better. The movement sent an entire group of people sliding across her stomach with screams while her laughter echoed through the room. "Sorry." She actually sounded genuinely apologetic, even while she kept laughing. Mike was far behind now. He could have climbed higher several times, but every time someone was about to fall, he helped them instead. Once, he completely gave up his own place near the edge of her dress so another researcher could move ahead. Anna slowly began realizing something was wrong. She looked back toward him from the witch child's shoulder. "Mike?" she said suspiciously. But before she could say more, the witch child excitedly clapped her hands together. "Two winners!" Anna and the young man beside her froze. They had reached the top. The witch child smiled widely and carefully lifted them between her fingers, while the rest of the researchers either still clung farther down or had already fallen. Mike still sat near her knee. Far from the top, the witch child looked down at him with a small smile. "You lost this round," she said almost teasingly. Mike simply shrugged and looked up at her. "Then I'll do better next round." But behind the smile, he already knew the truth. That was exactly where he had planned to end up. Chapter 16. Survive the Bed. The witch child lay on her stomach in front of them with her hands beneath her chin while her legs slowly kicked behind her. She looked almost too excited to sit still any longer. Her eyes followed every tiny movement among the researchers, as if she was already looking forward to their next reaction. "Okay," she said happily. "Next game." The tiny people still stood scattered across the floor after the climbing game. Several were exhausted, covered in dust and sweat after struggling up her enormous body, but no one dared protest anymore. The witch child quickly sat up on her knees and pointed toward the large bed in the corner of the room. "Now you have to survive my bed." Mike felt Anna freeze beside him. The bed had already seemed huge at normal size. Now it looked like an entire landscape. The blankets stretched like rolling hills, the pillows rose like cliff walls, and the folds in the fabric created dark valleys between them. "The rules are simple," she continued with a grin. "You can't fall off." She rose up and crawled toward the bed. Just her knees against the floor sent heavy vibrations through the room. Seconds later, blue lights surrounded the researchers again, and the world flashed around them. Mike gasped shortly as he suddenly found himself standing in the middle of the mattress. The surface sank softly beneath his feet like living ground. The fabric stretched in every direction around them, like a strange snowy landscape of white waves and folds. Then she came. The mattress practically exploded beneath her weight as the witch child jumped onto the bed with a loud giggle. The whole world was thrown violently up and down around them. Several researchers screamed as they lost their balance and rolled down the massive folds of the blanket. Mike grabbed onto the fabric with both hands while the mattress continued rocking violently beneath him. "Ha! It works!" she laughed excitedly. She quickly crawled above them on all fours, and every time her hands or knees hit the mattress, deep booms echoed like small earthquakes. The shadows from her enormous arms swept over them again and again. A man farther ahead lost his grip and began sliding directly toward the edge of the bed. "Help!" Mike reacted instinctively. He threw himself forward through the fabric and grabbed the man's arm only centimeters from the edge. Beneath them, the bed disappeared into a deep drop toward the floor far below. "Hold on," Mike shouted. The man desperately clung to him while the mattress rocked once again. The witch child noticed immediately. "Ah," she said with a wide smile. "You're saving them again." Mike said nothing. He simply pulled the man back up onto the mattress. A moment later, an enormous shadow fell over them. Mike barely had time to see the gigantic pillow dropping from the sky. "Look out!" Boom! The pillow hit the mattress like a meteor. The pressure from the impact alone sent several researchers flying through the folds of the blanket. One woman became completely buried beneath the fabric with a scream before her hand suddenly shot back upward in panic. The witch child was already lying half on top of the pillow, laughing loudly. "I love this game." She suddenly rolled onto her side. The entire mattress rose like a giant wave. Mike and Anna slid several meters through the fabric, while the researchers desperately tried clinging to the folds around them. "Mike?" Anna shouted. He grabbed her hand at the last second, just as she was about to slide over the edge. Her body hung halfway above the abyss, while her feet kicked desperately through the air. Far below them, they could see the floor. Mike pulled her back up again with straining arms. Anna stared at him breathlessly. "You could have kept going." Mike did not answer. Above them, the witch child suddenly rose onto her knees in the middle of the bed. Her weight caused the mattress to sink dramatically toward the center, and all the researchers began sliding toward her. Some screamed. Others desperately tried running against the slope. She only laughed while watching them come closer. "It's like little ants." 3 researchers reached the top of the blanket near the headboard and were immediately surrounded by blue light. "3 winners," she announced excitedly. The rest still slid helplessly around the mattress. Mike quickly looked upward. Only him and Anna were left now. Anna realized it a second later. Their eyes met. She understood almost immediately. "Mike," she whispered. But before she could say more, the witch child suddenly jumped forward on the mattress with a cheerful laugh. The wave hit them hard. Anna was thrown backward through the blanket, but Mike grabbed her and shoved her upward toward a high fold in the fabric. "Climb!" he shouted. "What about you?" Mike glanced upward briefly. The witch child's enormous hand was descending toward the mattress close beside him. He deliberately released his grip. Anna saw the look in his eyes for a brief second before he slid backward down through the fabric. "Mike!" She lunged forward and grabbed the edge of the blanket just in time while Mike disappeared farther down toward the edge of the bed. Blue light surrounded Anna. "Last winner," the witch child said happily. A second later, Mike slid over the edge. His stomach twisted during the fall while the enormous bed vanished above him. But before he could hit the floor, the familiar blue light surrounded him. When he landed once again on the floor in front of the bed, he could hear the witch child giggling happily above him. "So you lost again." Chapter 17. Something She Didn't Understand. The witch child could barely sit still anymore. She sat in the middle of the floor with Mike placed in front of her, while her large hands constantly moved excitedly around him. The blue light from her magic shimmered between her fingers, and slowly his body began to grow. Not back to normal size. Only a little. His perspective gradually changed until he no longer felt like a speck of dust on the floor. Now he was closer to the size of a large doll, tall enough to stand in front of her knees without completely disappearing into the surroundings. The witch child clapped excitedly. "Perfect," she said happily. "Now we can play much easier." Mike almost lost his balance from the vibrations of her clap. He looked up at her and still could not ignore the absurd difference between them. Even at this size, she towered over him like a living mountain. She hurried around the room on her bare feet while the floor shook beneath every step. Shortly after, she returned with her arms full of dolls, teddy bears, and toys, which she dropped around him with heavy thuds. A large teddy bear nearly toppled over onto him. "Oh, sorry," she giggled, quickly fixing it again. She sat down in front of him with crossed legs and immediately began eagerly pointing at the things around them. "We can have a tea party," she said excitedly. "Or build a fort, or maybe play school, or—" She stopped in the middle of the sentence. Something changed in her face. The smile slowly faded while her gaze became more searching as it moved across him. Mike felt it immediately. She was thinking again, really thinking. The witch child leaned slightly closer to him. You lost on purpose. It was no longer a question. Mike did not answer immediately. He simply looked down at the floor between the teddy bears while silence slowly filled the room. The witch child's voice became quieter. Why? Mike took a deep breath. He could feel her enormous eyes resting on him, waiting, and for the first time since all this began, she did not feel like a child wanting to play. Just someone trying to understand. He slowly lifted his gaze toward her. There was moisture in his eyes now, even though he tried hiding it behind a small smile. Before I worked here, he began quietly, I worked as a guard outside the foundation. The witch child said nothing. She sat completely still. I had a daughter, he continued. She was the most important thing in my life. His voice nearly broke on the last words. Mike looked away briefly, as if the memories still hurt too much to hold on to. She loved to play, all the time. She could make even the most normal things feel magical. A faint laugh escaped between his words. She used to force me into tea parties with her teddy bears. The witch child's gaze slowly drifted down toward the teddy bears around Mike. But one day, something escaped, he said more quietly now. An SCP. The air in the room felt heavier. The foundation caught it quickly, but not quickly enough. His hands trembled faintly. She died that same day. The witch child simply stared at him. Mike quickly wiped his eyes with his hand and tried to smile again, even though it hurt. I stayed here afterward, he said. 5 years now, because I thought, if I worked here, maybe I could stop something like that from happening again. He looked back up at her. Then I met you. The witch child blinked slowly. Mike took another slow breath. When you made us small, he said softly, and I started seeing you up close, I didn't see a monster. His expression softened. I just saw a child. The witch child's lips parted slightly, but no words came out. And in a strange way, Mike continued with a sad smile, you reminded me of her. The room was completely silent now. Even the ventilation felt distant. So no, he said quietly, I don't regret losing. He looked around at the teddy bears and dolls surrounding him. If it means you're not alone anymore, then I guess we can just play together. The witch child stared down at him without moving. For the first time since she had captured all of them, she looked completely speechless. And slowly, her eyes began filling with tears again. Chapter 18, A Real Friend. The witch child sat completely still after Mike's words. The enormous room suddenly felt strangely empty around them. The teddy bears and dolls, which only minutes earlier had been scattered across the floor as part of her happy fantasy world, now felt like lifeless objects beneath the weak light from the ceiling. She stared down at Mike with tear-filled eyes. Then her lower lip began to tremble. She whispered hoarsely. She drew in a shaky breath, but the words became trapped in her throat. Mike could see it happening right in front of him. The way she tried holding it back. The way she desperately tried to smile again. But it broke. The tears suddenly poured out. She folded her arms against herself and bent forward with a sob that made the entire floor vibrate around them. Small glittering drops fell from her face and shattered against the floor like rain. I just wanted a friend, she cried. Her voice completely cracked apart. A real friend I could play with. She grabbed one of the teddy bears beside her and pressed it tightly against her chest. My teddy bears don't talk back, she sobbed. They don't move. They don't get happy. She shook more and more now, like a child who had finally kept her feelings trapped inside for too long. So I just used my powers, she continued through tears. I tried making friends, little friends. She looked back down at Mike with red eyes. But I don't want you as my friend anymore. Mike blinked in surprise. Because I'm forcing you, she suddenly shouted in despair. That's what monsters do. She completely collapsed onto the floor in front of him with her face buried between her arms. Her enormous body trembled with sobs while her dark hair spread across the floor around her like a blanket. I'm just another monster. Mike stood still for a moment. Then he slowly walked toward her face. Even curled up like this, she was enormous beside him. Her cheek alone was larger than his entire body had been earlier that day. He could feel the warmth of her skin and hear the heavy, uneven breathing between her sobs. Carefully, he reached out his hand. His fingers touched her cheek. The witch child froze. Mike gently began stroking her cheek with small movements, exactly like a father trying to calm a child after a nightmare. "Hey," he said softly, "don't cry." She slowly opened one eye and looked down at him through her tears. "I want to be your friend," he continued quietly. "Whether I'm small or big, that doesn't change." His hand slowly moved through one of the tears on her skin. "I'll stay with you," he said. "I'll do whatever I can to make sure you're not alone." The witch child simply stared at him. No one had ever said something like that to her before. She felt his tiny hand against her skin again, warm and real, and slowly her crying began calming down. "Thank you," she whispered hoarsely. Blue light immediately began glowing around Mike. He felt warmth spread through his body again, but this time it did not hurt. The world around him slowly shrank back to normal size while his arms, legs, and voice returned to what they had been before. Seconds later, he was sitting on the floor in front of her again as a normal human. The witch child lifted her head slightly and looked at him in surprise. "I made you normal again," she murmured softly. Mike looked down at his hands. He could stand now. Run to the door. Try to escape. She knew it too. He could see the fear returning to her eyes at the thought. But instead, Mike slowly lay down beside her on the floor, very close. He carefully wrapped an arm around her head, like a father holding his child after a long night of crying. The witch child stiffened for a moment at the contact before slowly moving closer against him. Not like a monster, not like an SCP, just like a lonely girl who had finally found someone willing to stay with her, even when the door stood open. Chapter 19. More than a monster. The room had become quiet again, not the heavy silence the foundation was usually filled with, but something calmer, almost warm. Mike still lay on the floor beside the witch child, while she remained curled close against him, with her head resting near his shoulder. She looked small now, not like the SCP people feared behind thick steel doors and alarm systems, just like an 8-year-old girl who had cried herself exhausted. The weak light from the ceiling slid across her dark hair and the wet streaks on her cheeks. Teddy bears and dolls still lay scattered around them across the floor, knocked over during the explosion of emotions that had filled the room shortly before. Then came a click. The door slowly opened. Mike lifted his head. Anna stood in the doorway, staring into the room in confusion. Her gaze moved between the teddy bears, Mike on the floor, and the witch child lying close beside him, like a child seeking comfort after a nightmare. "What are you doing, Mike?" she asked quietly. Mike slowly stood up so he would not startle the witch child. The girl did not let go of him immediately, as if she feared he would disappear if she released him. "I'm comforting her," he answered calmly. "She's upset about being alone." Anna looked even more confused. "Okay," she said hesitantly. Something about her tone made Mike stop. She did not sound like someone who remembered everything. He stepped slightly closer to her. "Wait," he said slowly. "You don't remember what happened." Anna frowned. "What do you mean?" Mike opened his mouth to explain, but suddenly stopped. A voice echoed inside his head. Soft, sad. "I removed it." He froze for a moment. "I didn't want to cause problems for you." Mike slowly turned his gaze toward the witch child. She looked away almost immediately and pulled her knees slightly closer against herself. She did not need to say anything else. He understood. She had erased their memories, not his, only everyone else's. Anna still stood waiting for an answer. Mike hesitated for a moment before letting the question die. "Nothing," he said quietly. "It's okay." Anna still looked uncertain, but she let it go. Her gaze drifted back toward the witch child again, and Mike could clearly see the nervousness behind her eyes. Not hatred, not anger, just the fear everyone inside the foundation had learned to live with. Mike took a deep breath. "Anna, I want to talk to you about her." Anna quickly looked back at him. "Her?" Mike nodded. "She isn't evil. She's just lonely." The witch child sat completely still now, listening. Her hands still clung tightly to the edge of a teddy bear beside her. "She needs someone," Mike continued. "Someone willing to spend time with her, play with her, talk to her." Anna looked almost speechless. "Mike," she began carefully, "you know we can't just do that. The foundation would never allow it." "Look at her," he said it quietly, but there was something heavy behind the words. Anna fell silent. Slowly, she looked back toward the witch child again. The girl sat on the floor between her teddy bears with red eyes from crying. She did not look dangerous now, just uncertain, like she was waiting for them to turn away from her too. Mike slowly walked back toward her and sat beside her again. "This isn't a monster," he said softly. "This is a child with powers so enormous she could wipe all of us out just by wanting to." Anna swallowed hard. "But she doesn't," Mike continued. The room felt completely silent now. Even the researchers behind the observation glass stood without speaking. "The only thing she really wants," Mike said, looking down at the witch child, "is a friend who isn't afraid of her." The witch child lowered her gaze slightly at those words. Mike looked back at Anna. "Does that sound like a monster to you?" Anna did not answer immediately. She simply stood there looking at the little girl in front of her, at the teddy bears, at the way she sat close beside Mike as if he was the only safe thing in her world. Something in Anna's expression slowly changed. She began quietly. "I'll see what I can do." She looked seriously at Mike. "But this isn't going to be easy." Mike slowly nodded. "I know." He gently placed a hand on the witch child's hair. "I don't care," he said calmly. "I'll do anything for her." Chapter 20. Small Steps Towards Something Better. Time slowly began changing everything. Not quickly, not like a miracle happening overnight, but enough that even the people inside the foundation began noticing it. The witch child stopped screaming during the night. She stopped breaking things during her outbursts of anger and grief. The observations became calmer week after week, and the guards' reports gradually changed from words like unstable, dangerous, and unpredictable into something far stranger. The subject seems happier. No aggressive episodes in 13 days. She often asks when Mike is coming back. Mike visited her almost every single day. Sometimes after work, sometimes before his shifts, other times on his days off when he technically was not supposed to be there at all. He knew how dangerous it was for his career. Foundation employees were not supposed to form emotional attachments to SCPs. But he did not stop. The first time he brought her a gift, the witch child stared at the small bag in his hands as if she did not fully understand the concept. "Is it for me?" Mike had smiled and nodded. Inside was a small teddy bear with dark fur and blue button eyes. She held it tightly against her chest for the rest of the day. Later, he started bringing cake too. Small cupcakes with colorful frosting, little chocolate cakes, or candy he smuggled through security checkpoints, even though he fully understood how many rules he was breaking. The witch child lit up every single time. Not just because she received things, but because someone had thought about her without being forced to. Slowly, her room began changing too. The cold gray walls became covered with drawings, teddy bears, and small things Mike brought for her. Some of the guards quietly joked that her cell was starting to look more like a child's bedroom than a containment room. Others did not think it was funny, but the results were impossible to ignore. Mike also began helping her with her powers. Not big things, small exercises, how to move objects without destroying them, how to control teleportation more carefully, how to stop herself when her emotions became too strong. They often sat together on the floor for hours while she concentrated on tiny tasks. A pencil that had to float without snapping, a glass of water that was not allowed to explode, a teddy bear that had to teleport precisely from the bed into her hands. Whenever she succeeded, Mike always applauded her, and every single time she glowed with pride. "Did you see that?" she often asked excitedly. "I saw it," he always answered with a smile. She started laughing more too. Real laughter. Not the strange, nervous giggles she used to make when trying to hide her loneliness. Sometimes they simply sat and drew together. Other times, Mike read stories aloud to her while she rested her head in his lap and listened quietly like a normal child. Even Anna slowly began changing her opinion. She visited more often now. Not for long periods, but enough to notice the difference. The witch child became calmer around other people, less afraid of being hated, less alone. But the foundation did not change as quickly. Behind the observation glass, whispers still spread. Some researchers believed Mike was being manipulated. Others believed he had become emotionally compromised. And more people began asking the same question. What happened if the SCP lost control again one day? The morning it happened, Mike felt it immediately. 2 armed guards stood outside his office. Dr. Halverson wants to speak with you, one of them said shortly. Mike did not need to ask why. He quietly followed them through the long gray halls of the foundation while people around him avoided eye contact. He could feel the stares following him the entire way. When they reached the meeting room, the heavy door slowly opened in front of him. A long table waited on the other side. Dark suits, cold faces, folders with his name on the front. And in that moment, Mike knew his future inside the foundation was about to be decided. Chapter 21. The Bridge Builder. The air inside the meeting room felt heavy from the moment Mike sat down. The long table between him and the foundation leaders almost felt like a wall. Folders lay open in front of them, filled with reports, observations, and photographs from the past months. Mike recognized several of the dates immediately. The visits, the gifts, the time he had spent alone with the witch child. Nobody smiled. An older man with gray hair folded his hands together and looked directly at Mike. "Do you know why you're here?" Mike slowly nodded. "Yes, good." The man opened the folder in front of him. "You have violated multiple Foundation protocols." His voice was flat and professional. Unauthorized emotional attachment, personal objects inside containment, failure to report psychological incidents, and unofficial training sessions with a high-risk subject. Every word hit like a punch. Mike sat completely still. "You treated the SCP object like a child," another woman continued coldly, "not like a potential threat." Mike felt his stomach sink lower and lower. He had known this day would come eventually. The Foundation did not forgive things like this. "This is completely unacceptable," said the man at the head of the table. Mike lowered his gaze briefly. Then came the words he least expected. "And that is why you are going to continue your work." Mike immediately looked up. "What?" Several of the leaders exchanged short glances, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. It was almost as if even they disliked what they were about to say. The woman at the table leaned back with a tired sigh. "The world is changing, Mike." Another man continued for her. "New ideas have started appearing inside the Foundation. New projects." He paused briefly. "One of them is called Project Bridge." Mike frowned. "Project Bridge?" "An initiative," the man explained, "that attempts to create cooperation between humans and certain SCPs instead of constant isolation and fear." Mike simply stared. It almost sounded impossible coming from the Foundation. "Not all of us approve of it," the older man admitted honestly. "But the results cannot be ignored. Conflicts have decreased. Several SCPs react positively to social contact." His expression hardened slightly. "And no case has shown greater improvement than hers." The silence lasted only a moment. Then the door behind Mike slowly opened. Everyone in the room automatically turned. A man stepped inside. He was tall and calmly dressed in dark clothing without the normal Foundation symbols. No armed guards followed him. No tension. He moved with an almost strange calmness, as if he already knew nobody in the room would oppose him. His eyes quickly landed on Mike. A calm smile spread across his face. "So this is him." Mike could feel the entire room subtly change around the man. Even the leaders at the table seemed more restrained now. The woman at the table cleared her throat. "Mike? This is the Bridge Builder." The name sounded almost strangely simple, but the way they said it made it feel heavier than any title. The Bridge Builder slowly walked toward the table and casually sat on the edge of it instead of taking a chair. "I've read everything about you," he said calmly, "and about her." Mike did not know what to say. The Bridge Builder's smile widened slightly. "You did what hundreds of researchers couldn't." "What?" "You saw her as a human being." The words hit harder than Mike expected. The man tilted his head slightly. "Most people in here only see objects, threats, numbers on paper." He briefly glanced around at the leaders, which clearly did not make them happy. "You saw a child." Mike still said nothing. The Bridge Builder continued calmly. "Project Bridge needs people like you, people who can create trust without fear." He slowly stood back up. "I want you on my team." Mike blinked in surprise. "Seriously?" "Seriously." The man walked toward the door again before stopping and looking back at Mike with the same calm smile. "This is going to be a completely new era, for you and for her." He opened the door. "Welcome to Project Bridge."